Get away from the girl right now. The shout cracked across the outdoor parking deck behind Brookstone Mall so sharply that several shoppers froze mid-step near the escalators. Marcus Holloway slowly turned around, one hand still holding a paper bag from the sporting goods store while the other rested carefully near the shoulder of the little girl beside him. The child clung to his jacket with trembling fingers, her small sneakers planted against the concrete as if she was afraid the world might suddenly disappear beneath her feet. Red and blue lights flashed violently across the silver hoods of parked cars, reflecting in broken streaks against puddles left over from the afternoon rain. Officer Ryan Cole stepped out of the patrol cruiser with one hand raised, voice loud enough for every phone camera nearby to capture. "Sir, step away from the child and put your hands where I can see them." Marcus blinked once, calm despite the tension tightening around him like wire. Around them, people began slowing down. Some stopped entirely. A woman near the crosswalk lifted her phone without hesitation. Another man whispered something under his breath while pulling his teenage son farther back. The little girl squeezed Marcus tighter. "Please don't make him leave," she cried, her voice cracking through the noise of distant traffic and humming generators from the loading dock. Officer Cole's jaw hardened instantly. He took 2 quick steps forward, radio buzzing on his shoulder. "Sir, I said move away from her now." Marcus carefully lowered the shopping bag onto the wet pavement. Inside sat a pink children's sweatshirt and a half-finished pretzel wrapped in napkins. Nothing about him looked dangerous. His dark gray work jacket was faded at the elbows. Rainwater still clung to the shoulders from earlier. His boots were worn down from years of overnight security shifts. But none of that mattered now. All people saw was a tall black man standing beside a frightened little white girl in the middle of a crowded parking structure while police lights painted the concrete walls blue and red. "Officer," Marcus said quietly, keeping his voice level, "she was lost. I stayed with her until someone came." "Save it," Cole snapped. Kidnappers always got a story. The crowd reacted instantly to the word kidnapper. You could feel the atmosphere change. A mother near the entrance covered her mouth. Somebody muttered, "I knew something looked off." Marcus looked down toward the little girl beside him. Emily Parker could not have been older than 8. Her blonde curls were damp from tears, and one sleeve of her yellow cardigan hung crooked where she had been tugging on it nervously for nearly 30 minutes. Marcus had found her alone near the lower garage elevators crying beside a concrete pillar while hundreds of people walked past without stopping. He had offered her bottled water from the vending machine, sat 6 feet away so she wouldn't feel cornered, asked if she remembered her parents' names. She didn't. Only that her father drove a black SUV and that she got scared when she couldn't find him after coming out of the mall restroom. That was all. That should have been all. But now Officer Cole moved closer, eyes narrowed, one hand resting near his belt while bodycam lights blinked steadily against his uniform. "Get on your knees," he ordered. Emily immediately grabbed Marcus's sleeve harder. "No," she shouted through tears. "He helped me." But the words barely reached anyone. The flashing lights were too bright now. The crowd too loud. Phones held high in every direction. Marcus slowly lowered himself onto the cold pavement anyway, careful not to frighten the child still standing beside him. Rainwater soaked through the knees of his jeans as sirens echoed somewhere beyond the shopping center entrance. Then, from far across the parking structure, came another sound entirely. Deep engines. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. And one by one, heads in the crowd began turning toward the ramp leading into the garage. The sound of engines rolled through the parking structure low and heavy, not like ordinary traffic, but controlled, synchronized, expensive. People near the escalators stepped aside instinctively as the first black SUV appeared at the top of the concrete ramp, headlights cutting through the damp gray air. Then another followed behind it. Then another. Officer Ryan Cole glanced over his shoulder for half a second before turning his attention back toward Marcus. "Stay where you are," he ordered sharply, though his voice no longer carried the same confidence as before. Marcus remained on his knees beside the puddled pavement, palms visible, breathing slow and steady despite the growing tension around him. Emily still stood close beside him, tears streaking her cheeks while she clutched the sleeve of his jacket with both hands. The little girl looked toward the arriving vehicles as if she recognized something the rest of the crowd did not. Around them, phones continued recording from every angle. A teenager standing near a minivan whispered, "Who travels with that many SUVs?" Nobody answered him. The first vehicle stopped hard beside the flashing patrol cruiser. Its doors opened almost instantly. Two men stepped out wearing dark suits beneath long, rainproof coats, earpieces pressed tight against their collars. Their movements were fast but disciplined, eyes scanning the crowd before locking directly onto Emily. One of them reached toward his radio immediately. "Visual confirmation," he said calmly. "She is here." The second SUV stopped behind the first, then a third. Within seconds, the entire lower level of the garage was filled with black vehicles lined bumper to bumper beneath the cold fluorescent lights overhead. Officer Cole straightened slightly. His hand drifted away from his belt now. Something in the atmosphere had shifted completely. Marcus noticed it too. The accusation that had filled the air moments earlier was suddenly gone, replaced by uncertainty. Nobody in the crowd was whispering anymore. Even the distant hum of shopping carts and traffic outside seemed quieter now. Emily suddenly tugged harder on Marcus's sleeve. "That is my dad's security team," she whispered shakily. Marcus looked down at her for the first time since the SUVs arrived. "Your father has security?" he asked gently. Emily nodded quickly. "He gets threats sometimes." Before Marcus could respond, another SUV door opened farther back near the concrete support columns. This time the man who stepped out moved differently from the others. Older, slower. But the moment he appeared, every suited agent nearby adjusted their posture immediately. The man wore a charcoal overcoat over a navy suit, silver hair damp from the mist outside. His face looked pale beneath the parking garage lights, not from anger, but from fear. Real fear. His eyes moved frantically across the scene until they landed on Emily. "Dad," she cried. The sound echoed across the garage. In an instant, the man crossed the pavement toward her, ignoring the officers entirely. Emily released Marcus's sleeve and ran straight into his arms. He held her tightly against his chest, eyes closed for a brief moment as relief visibly passed through him like a wave. Several people in the crowd lowered their phones now, suddenly uncomfortable with what they had been assuming only minutes earlier. Officer Cole stepped forward cautiously. "Sir," he began, "we were responding to a possible abduction call involving this individual." The older man slowly turned his head toward him. His expression hardened immediately. "This individual," he repeated quietly. Then his eyes shifted toward Marcus, still kneeling on the wet pavement with rain soaking through his jeans. Something changed in the man's face the instant he saw him clearly. Recognition. Complete and immediate. "Oh my God," he whispered. For the first time since the police arrived, Marcus looked genuinely confused. The older man took one stunned step closer, staring at him beneath the flashing red and blue lights. "Marcus Holloway?" he asked softly. The entire parking structure seemed to freeze again. Marcus blinked once, then slowly nodded. "Yes, sir." The man's throat tightened visibly. 3 years ago, he said carefully, "Westbridge Elementary School." Marcus's expression shifted slightly now. He remembered. Smoke. Screaming children. Emergency lights. Rain against shattered glass. The man standing in front of him was Judge Nathan Parker. And suddenly the judge looked back toward Officer Cole with disbelief spreading across his face like ice. "You put handcuffs on the man who saved my daughter's life." Officer Ryan Cole looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. The flashing patrol lights reflected across his pale face, while rainwater dripped slowly from the brim of his cap onto the concrete below. Around him, the entire atmosphere inside the parking structure had transformed from accusation to stunned silence. Nobody in the crowd was recording openly anymore. Some lowered their phones completely. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances as the reality of the situation settled over them piece by piece. Marcus Holloway remained kneeling on the wet pavement, wrists still restrained behind his back, though somehow he looked calmer than everyone else around him. Judge Nathan Parker stepped forward slowly, Emily still holding tightly onto his coat sleeve. "Take those off him," the judge said, his voice low but firm enough to cut through every remaining sound in the garage. Officer Cole hesitated. It lasted only a second, but everyone noticed it. One of the suited security agents standing near the SUVs immediately narrowed his eyes. "Officer," he said carefully, "the judge gave you an instruction." Cole swallowed hard and stepped toward Marcus at last. His hands moved quickly now, no longer aggressive, no longer certain. The metal restraints clicked open. Marcus slowly brought his hands forward again, rubbing one wrist lightly where the pressure had left a faint red mark against his dark skin. He did not glare at the officer, did not raise his voice. He simply stood up carefully, smoothing rainwater from the front of his jacket, while Emily looked at him with watery eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Marcus gave her a small nod. "I am okay, sweetheart." The simplicity of his answer somehow made several people in the crowd look even more ashamed. Judge Parker stared at Marcus for a long moment before speaking again. "I looked for you after the school fire," he said softly. "Nobody could tell me where you went." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly toward the pavement. "I did not stay around long after that." 3 years earlier, smoke had filled the hallways of Westbridge Elementary after an electrical explosion trapped several classrooms during a thunderstorm. Marcus had been working overnight security at a construction site across the street when he saw children pounding against second-floor windows through the smoke. By the time emergency crews arrived, Marcus had already gone inside multiple times helping students and teachers reach safety through an emergency exit near the gymnasium. Emily Parker had been one of the last children still trapped in the building. The judge's voice grew quieter now, almost unsteady. "My daughter would not be standing here if it was not for you." Marcus shifted uncomfortably beneath the attention. Any decent person would have done the same. "No," Judge Parker replied immediately. "Not everyone runs toward danger for strangers." The words hung heavily in the cold air beneath the fluorescent lights overhead. Nearby, Officer Cole stood completely still beside his patrol car, avoiding eye contact with nearly everyone around him. His earlier confidence had vanished entirely now. The body camera attached to his uniform still blinked steadily, recording every second. One older woman near the escalator finally spoke under her breath. He was helping her the whole time. Another man shook his head slowly. Nobody even asked him what happened. Marcus glanced toward the people gathered nearby. He could feel the shift in their expressions now. Minutes earlier they had looked at him with suspicion, fear, judgment. Now many could barely meet his eyes at all. Emily suddenly stepped away from her father and walked back toward Marcus again. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out the small folded napkin Marcus had given her earlier beside the vending machines. Inside it was the unfinished pretzel he bought after she said she was hungry but too scared to eat alone. "You stayed with me even when everybody thought something bad," she whispered. Marcus looked down at the child quietly. Then he smiled for the first time all evening. Soft, tired, genuine. "Nobody should be alone when they are scared," he said. Behind them, another black SUV rolled slowly into the garage entrance while distant thunder echoed somewhere above the city skyline. But now nobody in that parking structure was looking at Marcus Holloway like a threat anymore. They were looking at him like a mirror reflecting something they did not want to admit about themselves. Rain tapped softly against the concrete walls of the parking structure while the crowd slowly began to thin out, though nobody seemed eager to leave completely. People lingered beside shopping carts and idling cars, pretending to check their phones while stealing quiet glances toward Marcus Holloway and the growing line of black SUVs near the patrol vehicles. The tension had changed shape now. Earlier it had felt sharp and loud. Now it felt heavy, embarrassed. Officer Ryan Cole stood near the front bumper of his cruiser with his shoulders stiff beneath the flashing lights, one hand resting awkwardly against his duty belt as if he no longer knew where to place it. Judge Nathan Parker turned toward him slowly, rain mist collecting along the shoulders of his coat. "Tell me exactly what happened here," he said. His tone was controlled, but the weight behind it made several officers nearby straighten instinctively. Cole cleared his throat once before speaking. "We received a report from a civilian caller claiming there was a suspicious male holding a distressed child near the lower parking elevators." The words sounded rehearsed now, fragile beneath the reality, sitting directly in front of everyone. Judge Parker glanced toward Emily. The little girl still stood close beside Marcus, holding the folded napkin carefully in both hands. "Was my daughter harmed?" the judge asked calmly. "No, sir," Cole admitted quietly. "Did she ask for help escaping him?" "No, sir." "Did Mr. Holloway threaten anyone?" Cole hesitated again. "No," the judge's eyes hardened slightly. Then why exactly was he placed in restraints before any questions were asked? Nobody answered immediately. Even the sound of rain outside seemed louder during the silence that followed. Marcus shifted uncomfortably near the edge of the parking lane, clearly wishing the attention would move away from him entirely. He looked exhausted now. His dark jacket still clung damply to his shoulders, and faint circles beneath his eyes hinted at long overnight shifts and too little sleep. One of the security agents quietly approached with a clean towel and offered it to him. Marcus accepted it politely with a soft thank you before wiping rainwater from his hands. The simple gesture somehow made the scene feel even more human, more uncomfortable. Officer Cole finally exhaled slowly. The caller sounded panicked, he said. When we arrived, the situation looked concerning. Marcus looked toward him then, not angry, not hostile, just tired. Because I am black and she is white, he said quietly. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The sentence landed harder than shouting ever could have. Cole immediately looked down toward the wet pavement. A younger officer standing near the second patrol car shifted awkwardly beside him. Nearby, an older woman who had been recording earlier slowly lowered her phone entirely and slipped it into her purse. Judge Parker studied Marcus carefully for several seconds before speaking again. You still stayed with her knowing people might misunderstand. Marcus gave a faint shrug. She was crying, he answered simply. Children should not have to feel abandoned. Emily looked up at him with glassy eyes. He kept telling me my dad would come, she whispered softly. He said not everybody leaves. The words hit something deep inside the garage. Several people visibly looked away after hearing them. Marcus himself seemed surprised by the comment, almost embarrassed by the attention it brought him. He rubbed the back of his neck lightly and glanced toward the concrete ceiling overhead where fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the rows of parked vehicles. Judge Parker took a slow breath before stepping closer to Marcus. Do you know what my daughter said after the school fire? He asked quietly. Marcus shook his head once. Every night for nearly a year, she told us about the man who carried her through smoke while everybody else was running away. Emily smiled faintly through damp lashes. You said heroes are just people who stop walking when somebody needs help. Marcus looked down at her, stunned for a moment as if he had forgotten his own words. Around them, the last traces of suspicion inside that parking garage seemed to disappear completely. Not because of the SUVs, not because of the judge, but because the truth finally sounded louder than fear. The rain finally began to ease outside the parking structure, leaving behind only a thin silver mist drifting through the garage entrance while reflections from police lights shimmered across the wet concrete floor. Most of the original crowd had disappeared now, but the few who remained stood unusually quiet, as if nobody trusted themselves to speak too loudly anymore. Marcus Holloway leaned lightly against the side of a concrete support column while one of the security agents handed him a bottle of water. His hands looked steady again, but exhaustion sat heavily in his face. Judge Nathan Parker remained nearby, speaking quietly with members of his security detail, while Emily sat wrapped in her father's coat on the back seat step of one of the SUVs, still watching Marcus every few seconds to make sure he had not left. Officer Ryan Cole stood several feet away beside his patrol vehicle, shoulders rigid beneath the fluorescent glow overhead. The confidence that once filled his posture was completely gone now. He looked like a man replaying his own decisions in real time and realizing he no longer liked what he saw. One of the younger officers finally approached him carefully. You okay? Cole gave a short nod, though it was obvious he was not. Across the garage, another patrol unit arrived slowly before stopping near the entrance ramp. Two supervisors stepped out immediately after hearing details over the radio. Their expressions shifted the moment they recognized Judge Parker standing beside the line of black SUVs. One of them quietly asked another officer for clarification while scanning the scene. Marcus noticed the movement, but said nothing. He seemed more interested in checking whether Emily had finally stopped crying. After a moment, Judge Parker walked back toward him, hands tucked into the pockets of his overcoat. My team is arranging transportation home for you, the judge said. Marcus shook his head politely. That is not necessary, sir. My truck is parked on level 3. At least allow us to escort you. Marcus gave a small tired smile. I appreciate it, but I think enough people have already mistaken me for something dangerous tonight. The honesty in his voice hit harder than bitterness would have. Judge Parker looked down briefly, unable to argue with him. Nearby, Officer Cole slowly stepped forward at last. Every movement felt hesitant now. Human. Mr. Holloway, he began quietly. Marcus turned toward him calmly. The garage seemed to fall silent again almost immediately. Even the security agents stopped moving. Cole swallowed once before continuing. I handled this badly. Marcus did not answer right away. Cole glanced briefly toward the wet pavement where Marcus had been forced onto his knees less than an hour earlier. I saw a situation and made assumptions before asking questions, he admitted. That should not have happened. Marcus studied him carefully beneath the pale garage lights. There was no anger in his expression, only fatigue. You know what the hardest part was? Marcus asked softly. Cole looked up slowly. Emily trusted me immediately, Marcus said. But the adults did not. The words settled over everyone nearby like cold rain. One of the security agents looked away entirely after hearing them. Cole opened his mouth slightly as if to defend himself, but nothing came out. Because there was nothing to defend, Judge Parker crossed his arms quietly beside them while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline. Marcus took a slow breath before continuing. I was not angry when you stopped me, he said. People are protective of children. I understand that. But you never looked at me like a person first. Officer Cole lowered his eyes again. The flashing red and blue lights reflected weakly across the wet hood of the patrol cruiser between them. I am sorry, he said finally. Marcus nodded once, accepting the apology without triumph, without revenge, without making the moment crueler than it already was. That somehow made it even heavier. Emily suddenly climbed down from the SUV and walked back over carrying the folded pretzel napkin carefully in both hands. She looked between Marcus and Officer Cole before quietly tugging Marcus's sleeve again. My dad says heroes get medals, she whispered. But I think maybe heroes are just the people who stay kind after somebody treats them wrong. Nobody spoke after that. Not the officers. Not the security agents. Not even Judge Parker. Because in that cold parking garage filled with flashing lights and fading rain, an 8-year-old girl had somehow said the one thing every adult there needed to hear. The garage had grown quieter by the minute. Most of the flashing patrol lights were gone now, leaving only soft reflections trembling across the wet concrete floor beneath the remaining vehicles. Somewhere outside, traffic moved steadily through the city, tires hissing against rain-dark streets while cold evening air drifted through the open entrance ramps. Marcus Holloway stood near the edge of the parking structure, holding the unopened bottle of water loosely in one hand. He looked ready to leave. Yet something about the silence around him made it feel like the night itself was not finished speaking. Judge Nathan Parker leaned against the side of one of the black SUVs nearby, his coat unbuttoned now, exhaustion softening the sharpness usually carried by powerful men. Emily had finally fallen asleep in the back seat wrapped beneath a gray security blanket, her small face peaceful beneath the dim interior light. The sight seemed to calm everyone around her. Officer Ryan Cole remained several yards away near his cruiser, staring at the rainwater slowly sliding down the windshield. For the first time since arriving, he looked less like an officer and more like a man alone with his own thoughts. Marcus glanced toward him briefly before looking away again. He did not seem interested in humiliation or revenge, only in going home. One of the security agents quietly approached Judge Parker, holding a tablet. Sir, local media picked up some of the footage online already. The judge exhaled heavily. Of course they did. The agent hesitated before lowering his voice. People are responding strongly. Judge Parker glanced toward Marcus, standing alone near the concrete railing. As they should. Nearby, Officer Cole finally stepped away from his vehicle and slowly approached Marcus one more time. This time there was no authority in his walk. No performance. Just hesitation. Marcus heard the footsteps and turned calmly. Cole stopped several feet away beneath the pale fluorescent glow overhead. My father was a police officer, Cole said quietly after a long silence. Marcus listened without speaking. He always told me hesitation gets people hurt. So I learned to react fast, to control situations before they became dangerous. Marcus nodded faintly. That fear can keep people alive sometimes. Cole swallowed hard. But maybe it can also blind them. The sound of rain dripping from the upper parking levels echoed softly around them. Marcus rested both hands along the cold concrete railing beside him. Fear usually looks for shortcuts, he said. It sees what it expects instead of what is actually there. Cole lowered his head slightly. When I saw you with her. He stopped mid-sentence, unable to finish it honestly without hearing how ugly it sounded aloud. Marcus finished it for him gently. You saw a threat before you saw a man. Cole closed his eyes briefly. Yes. The honesty hurt more than denial would have. Across the garage, Judge Parker watched quietly beside the SUVs without interrupting. Marcus stared out toward the city lights glowing beyond the rain for several seconds before speaking again. "Do you know what Emily asked me while we waited downstairs near the elevators?" Cole looked up slowly. "She asked if people disappear forever when nobody comes looking for them." Cole's face tightened slightly. Marcus smiled sadly. "That is not something a child should worry about." A cold breeze drifted through the structure, carrying the distant scent of rain and engine oil. Marcus finally opened the bottle of water and took a small drink before continuing softly. "Kids remember how adults make them feel during scary moments. They carry it for years." Cole looked toward the sleeping child inside the SUV. "I think I made tonight worse for her." "Maybe," Marcus admitted honestly. "But you can decide what she remembers next." The words settled deeply into the silence between them. No shouting, no lectures, just truth spoken quietly enough that it could not be escaped. Cole stared at Marcus for a long moment, as if seeing him clearly for the first time all evening. Not as a suspect, not as a headline, just a tired man who chose kindness in a moment when nobody would have blamed him for walking away. Somewhere beyond the garage, thunder rolled faintly across the dark sky again. But inside the fading glow of fluorescent lights and rain reflections, something softer had finally begun replacing fear. The rain had almost completely stopped by the time Marcus Holloway finally stepped away from the concrete railing near the edge of the garage. Thin drops still slid from overhead pipes and splashed softly against the pavement below, but the storm itself had passed, leaving behind only cold air and reflections of city lights shimmering across the wet parking levels. Most of the police vehicles were gone now. Only Officer Ryan Cole's cruiser remained beside the long row of black SUVs. The silence inside the structure felt strangely intimate after everything that had happened there. Marcus adjusted the collar of his damp jacket and glanced toward the escalators leading deeper into the mall. "I should get home," he said quietly. Judge Nathan Parker nodded once, though something in his face suggested he was not ready for the night to end so easily. "At least let my driver take you." Marcus smiled faintly. "My truck still works fine." Before the judge could respond, one of the security agents approached quickly holding a phone. "Sir," he said carefully, "you should probably see this." Judge Parker took the device and frowned slightly. On the screen played shaky cell phone footage from earlier that evening. The video showed Marcus kneeling on the wet pavement while Emily clung to his sleeve, crying for the officers not to take him away. The camera shook violently as comments from bystanders filled the audio. Some voices sounded uncertain. Others sounded cruel. The judge's jaw tightened as the footage continued. Then the video cut to the moment the SUVs arrived and recognition spread across the crowd. Millions of views already. Thousands of comments appearing by the minute. Judge Parker slowly lowered the phone. "The entire country is watching this now." Marcus looked uncomfortable immediately. "I do not want attention." "You may not get a choice anymore," the judge admitted quietly. Nearby, Officer Cole overheard the conversation and looked visibly sick. The younger officer who had arrived earlier stepped beside him, holding another phone. "Sir," he whispered carefully, "your body cam footage leaked too." Cole stared at the screen in silence. Every moment was there. The accusation, the assumptions, the restraint before questions. And then Marcus remaining calm through all of it, while protecting a frightened child who trusted him more than the adults around her. Cole rubbed one hand slowly across his forehead. "My God." A cold wind drifted through the garage entrance, carrying distant sirens somewhere far downtown. Marcus noticed the expression on Cole's face and walked toward him slowly. "Officer." Cole looked up immediately, almost startled that Marcus would approach him at all. Marcus nodded toward the phone. "You cannot change what happened tonight." Cole swallowed hard. "I know, but maybe somebody watching it will." The words caught Cole completely off guard. Marcus looked toward the city lights beyond the parking structure before continuing softly. "Maybe some father watching at home will think twice before teaching his son to fear people who look like me. Maybe some officer somewhere will ask one more question before reaching for handcuffs." Cole stared at him in silence. Marcus could have destroyed him publicly in that moment, could have humiliated him the same way he had been humiliated earlier on the pavement. Instead, he spoke like a man more interested in healing than revenge. Judge Parker watched the exchange carefully from beside the SUVs. Something emotional moved briefly across his face before he stepped closer. "Marcus," he said quietly, "there is something you still do not know." Marcus turned toward him. The judge took a slow breath. After the school fire, Emily stopped speaking for almost 4 months. Marcus blinked softly, surprised. "The doctors called it trauma response," the judge continued. "She barely talked to anyone except her mother." He glanced toward the sleeping child inside the SUV. "But every night, she asked the same question." Marcus waited silently. Judge Parker's voice lowered almost to a whisper. "She kept asking whether the man who saved her made it out safely too." Marcus looked toward Emily through the tinted SUV window, his expression softening in a way nobody there had seen before. For several quiet seconds, nobody spoke at all. Then Emily stirred slightly beneath the blanket and sleepily pressed one small hand against the glass beside her. Marcus smiled gently without even realizing he was doing it. And in that moment, beneath fading storm clouds and fluorescent garage lights, every person still standing there understood the same thing at once. The strongest man in that parking structure had never been the one carrying the badge or the title. It had been the man who stayed kind even after the world gave him every reason not to. The city lights beyond the parking structure shimmered against rain-dark streets, while the last traces of the storm drifted slowly east across the skyline. Inside the garage, the atmosphere had softened completely now. The tension that once crackled through the concrete levels like static electricity had dissolved into something quieter, heavier, almost reflective. Marcus Holloway stood near his old pickup truck on level 3, while members of Judge Nathan Parker's security detail slowly prepared to leave. The black SUVs idled beneath the fluorescent lights, engines humming softly in the background like distant thunder, finally losing strength. Emily was awake again now, wrapped sleepily in the oversized gray blanket as she sat in the back seat doorway of the lead SUV, watching Marcus with tired eyes. Judge Parker walked beside him toward the truck in silence for several seconds before speaking. "You know," he said quietly, "most people in your position tonight would be calling lawyers by now." Marcus rested one hand along the rusted edge of his truck bed before answering. "Maybe, but you are not." Marcus gave a faint smile. "I have spent enough years being angry." The honesty in his voice carried no bitterness, only weariness earned slowly over time. Judge Parker studied him carefully beneath the pale garage lights. "That does not mean you deserved any of this." Marcus looked down briefly at the water still pooled near the tires of his truck. "No," he admitted softly. "But carrying hate home tonight would not help Emily sleep better either." The judge lowered his eyes for a moment after hearing that. Somewhere nearby, Officer Ryan Cole remained beside his cruiser, speaking quietly with one of the supervisors who had arrived earlier. The conversation looked tense but respectful now. No raised voices. No defensiveness. Just consequences finally arriving in silence. Cole glanced toward Marcus several times during the discussion, but never interrupted him again. Emily suddenly climbed carefully out of the SUV and padded across the damp concrete toward Marcus with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her father started to stop her instinctively before realizing she was safe now. Completely safe. The little girl walked straight up to Marcus and held out the folded napkin that still protected the unfinished pretzel from earlier. "You forgot your dinner," she whispered sleepily. Marcus laughed softly under his breath for the first time all evening. The sound surprised nearly everyone nearby because it carried warmth instead of exhaustion. He accepted the napkin carefully, like it was something valuable. "Thank you, sweetheart." Emily hesitated before speaking again. "Are you still going to help lost people after tonight?" The question settled over the garage with painful gentleness. Marcus looked at the child quietly for several seconds before kneeling slightly so he could meet her eyes. "Yes," he answered softly. "Why?" Marcus glanced briefly toward the patrol cruiser across the garage before looking back at her. "Because if good people stop helping each other after hard moments, then fear wins." Emily stared at him as if memorizing every word. Then she suddenly leaned forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck. Marcus froze slightly in surprise before carefully hugging her back. The garage went completely silent again. Even the security agents looked away respectfully. Judge Parker pressed one hand against his mouth for a brief moment, emotion flickering across his face before he regained composure. Officer Cole watched from beside the cruiser, shoulders lowered now beneath the fading police lights. The image in front of him looked nothing like the dangerous situation he thought he had arrived to stop earlier that night. It looked like trust, humanity, kindness, surviving humiliation without becoming cruel in return. Emily finally stepped back and smiled up at Marcus through tired eyes. "You are still my hero," she whispered. Marcus looked genuinely overwhelmed for a second. He swallowed quietly before answering. "Get home safe, okay?" She nodded. Judge Parker slowly approached again and extended his hand. Marcus looked at it briefly before shaking it firmly. "Thank you," the judge said. "Not as a powerful man, not as a federal judge, just as a father." Marcus nodded once. "Take care of her." Then he climbed into his old pickup truck while the black SUVs idled silently nearby beneath fading fluorescent lights and the lingering smell of rain. And somehow, in that cold concrete garage where suspicion had once arrived so quickly, kindness was the thing leaving the deepest mark behind. The old pickup truck rumbled softly as Marcus Holloway guided it down the exit ramp of the parking structure and out into the sleeping city. Rain still clung to the windshield in scattered silver drops while streetlights stretched long reflections across the pavement ahead of him. Behind him, the line of black SUVs slowly disappeared into the distance, their headlights fading one by one beneath the dark skyline. Marcus drove with one hand resting lightly on the wheel and the unfinished pretzel still sitting carefully folded in its napkin on the passenger seat beside him. The city looked different after midnight. Quieter, honest somehow. Convenience stores glowed softly beneath buzzing signs. Empty bus benches sat wet beneath street lamps. Steam drifted upward from sewer grates into the cold air, while distant sirens echoed somewhere far downtown like fading memories. Marcus finally pulled into the small apartment complex where he rented a second-floor unit above a laundromat on the east side of the city. The building was old, brick-worn pale from decades of weather, but warm yellow lights still glowed from several windows despite the late hour. He parked beside the curb and sat quietly for a moment without moving. The silence inside the truck felt heavy now that the adrenaline of the night had finally faded. His wrists still carried faint red marks beneath the sleeves of his jacket. He stared at them briefly before exhaling slowly and climbing out into the cold air. Upstairs, the hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old wood polish. Marcus unlocked his apartment door carefully and stepped inside. The room was small but clean. A couch near the window. Folded laundry stacked neatly on a chair. A framed photograph of his mother beside an old lamp glowing softly in the corner. Marcus placed the folded napkin with the pretzel gently onto the kitchen counter before removing his damp jacket. Then he stopped when he noticed something flashing repeatedly on his phone across the table. Missed calls. Messages. Notifications pouring in faster than the screen could refresh. Marcus frowned slightly and picked it up. The video had spread everywhere now. Millions of views across every platform. Headlines. Interviews. Strangers calling him a hero. Others apologizing publicly for assumptions they admitted they had made while watching the footage. One message stood out above the rest. It came from a local community center downtown. Because of what happened tonight, 3 people signed up to volunteer for missing child outreach. Thank you for reminding people what compassion looks like. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then slowly lowered the phone without responding. Outside his apartment window, rainwater slid softly down the glass, while the city hummed quietly beneath the dark sky. Across town, Officer Ryan Cole sat alone inside his patrol cruiser parked beneath an overpass with the engine off and the bodycam footage paused on the dashboard screen. The image frozen there showed Marcus kneeling on the wet pavement while comforting a frightened child who trusted him completely. Cole rubbed tired hands across his face before quietly shutting the screen off altogether. Somewhere else in the city, Judge Nathan Parker carried his sleeping daughter upstairs inside their home while she murmured softly against his shoulder. Did Marcus get home safe? The judge smiled faintly despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Yes, sweetheart, he whispered. He did. Back inside his apartment, Marcus stood near the kitchen sink looking out across the rain-dark streets below. He looked tired, quiet, ordinary. Nothing about him suggested headlines or hero stories or viral videos. Just a man standing alone beneath soft apartment light after a very long night. After a moment, he finally picked up the unfinished pretzel from the counter and smiled to himself quietly. Then he turned off the kitchen light. Outside, Rain continued falling gently against the city while headlights drifted silently through the darkness below. And somewhere in that sleeping city, people who had watched the footage earlier that night lay awake thinking about the same uncomfortable truth. The most powerful thing Marcus Holloway carried was never authority or status or fear. It was the simple decision to remain kind in a world that had not always been kind to him.